Hey Optimancers, Chris here. I want to get back into talking about clerics, and today I want to do a build video. And this build video will be a multi-class character, so it's not just a cleric build, it's going to be a ranger cleric build. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank some of my top level Patreon subscribers. Each of these subscribers has subscribed at the Archmage level, and I look forward to talking with all of you in a private chat later this month. But I want to personally thank Leighton Hagland, Awesome Face, and Michael Troy for your patronage. It is hugely appreciated, and I actually want to thank everyone who has supported me through Patreon. It is a huge help to this channel, and to anyone who is interested in joining my Patreon, there is a link in the video description if you want to check it out. Now this build is going to be a specialized build, especially good at a certain kind of campaign. So if you are going to be playing in a campaign where you are expecting to be going into the Underdark, whether you're doing something like an Out of the Abyss campaign or a homebrew campaign where the DM tells you that a lot of the campaign is going to be taking place in the Underdark, this is the character that I think would be most effective if you are looking at a character that is going to be good at party support and doing damage. Now, although this character is going to be primarily specialized at working within the Underdark, it should be an effective character when you're not in the Underdark as well. It's just going to be especially good in the Underdark. And if you play Adventure League, this is a legal build for that, as we will be using the Player's Handbook and Xanathars only. And I call this build the Subterranean Slayer. So let's get started. So here we are on D&D Beyond, and we have the Subterranean Slayer, and I've turned off all the homebrew content and all the setting-specific stuff. As I said, we will only be using Player's Handbook and Xanathars for this build. And the idea for this build will be, it was a human, perhaps they were captured by the Drow as a youngster, put into slavery, they escaped, and now they hunt Drow for fun. So this is going to be a variant human to start off with. Now the variant human is going to give us the bonuses to the right ability scores. It is also going to give us that starting feat, and that's going to be essential for this build. Now for starting language, since we are specializing in the Underdark, Undercommon seems like a pretty obvious pick. The ability score increases we're going to begin with are Dexterity and Wisdom. Then we will get our starting skill, and as usual, I'm going to take Perception. And then we're going to get our starting feat. And the starting feat I'm going to begin with is Crossbow Expert. So this character is going to use a hand crossbow. And with Crossbow Expert, that's going to give us a bonus action attack with that hand crossbow. So starting at first level, we're going to be able to make 2 attacks on our turn. The other thing this feat will do for us is if we get caught in melee, and we could fairly easily, especially at higher levels with this build, I'll explain why when we get there, we could end up in melee, and if we do, we don't have to worry about switching out. We can still use our primary weapon. Now the ability scores here are dead easy. This is what we're going to do. We're going to do a point buy, and we are going to pump up our dexterity right to the top. We're going to bump up our constitution right to the top. And we are going to bump up our wisdom right to the top. That's going to give us a 16 dexterity, 15 constitution, and 16 wisdom. Everything else we're just dumping. Then we're going to begin with our starting class, and that is going to be Ranger. And with the Ranger, we're going to get 3 additional proficiencies, and we're going to grab Stealth and Survival, and we are going to grab Athletics. Now, our strength isn't great. But that's even more reason why we want to be proficient in athletics, because sometimes you just have to make those athletics rolls, and I'd rather have a bonus on that roll than a penalty. Now Rangers get 2 abilities at first level, Favored Enemy and Natural Explorer. Neither of these are great abilities, but I will say that if we have some idea of what kind of enemies we're likely to face and what kind of terrain we're likely to be in, most of the time they can be reasonable abilities. And that's why a specialized build for Underdark, for something like Out of the Abyss, this could still work reasonably well for us. With our favorite enemy, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be selecting humanoids, and that allows us to select 2 different kinds of humanoids. This is a drow hunter, so we're going to take elves, And the other humanoid we're going to take is dwarves, because of course in the Underdark we have grey dwarves, which are an evil form of dwarf. We're going to get a language associated with our favorite enemies, and if you look at the drow in the player's handbook, what they start with is Elvish. Now I assume there's a specific dialect of Elvish that's common to drow, and we would assume that our character would have that dialect of Elvish, the one that drow most commonly speak. So what our favorite enemy is going to give us, we're going to get advantage on wisdom survival checks to track our favorite enemies. We have survival, we have a good wisdom, so we're going to be good at tracking already. Advantage on that basically almost guarantees successful tracking rolls for either of those creatures, as well as intelligence checks to recall information about them. So mainly this is just going to be boosting our tracking. That's the main thing that's going to do for us. The Natural Explorer is going to be a little bit more useful for us. We're going to take Underdark, and assuming we're going to be in the Underdark all the time, this is actually going to give us some significant advantages. Number 1, difficult terrain doesn't slow your group's travel. Now if you are playing in an Underdark campaign, expect difficult terrain over long periods of travel. So this advantage is actually a really big one. The group can't become lost except by magical means. Again, really relevant in an Underdark campaign. Getting lost in mazes of tunnels is often part of what an Underdark campaign includes, and because we have Natural Explorer Underdark, we are immune to that. When we're engaged in another activity while traveling, such as foraging, navigating, or tracking, we remain alert to danger, so no -5 to passive perception checks. If we're traveling alone, we can move stealthily at a normal pace. This is important because what it means is that if we are scouting, then we can move at full speed while we are using our stealth. When we forage, we find twice as much food as we normally would. Again, finding food in the Underdark is often part of the campaign, so this is again something that's going to be useful to us. And while tracking other creatures, you learn their exact number, sizes, and how long ago they passed through the area. Again, really useful. Finally, whenever we make an intelligence or wisdom check related to our favored terrain, and I would assume that would include things like tracking, your proficiency bonus is doubled if you're using a skill you're proficient in. So this stacks with the advantage we would get from favored enemy, for example. Again, this is not normal, because usually with a ranger, Natural Explorer isn't that great. But if we are playing in a campaign, we know it's going to be Underdark. Taking Natural Explorer Underdark is going to be big. Then we're going to choose our background. Now there is no drow slave background, but probably the closest we're going to come to that is maybe the urchin. That's going to give us sleight of hand, and we're going to get an additional skill of our choice. And I like the acrobatics skill here. Things like balance could very well come up in an Underdark campaign. We have a good dexterity that's going to work well with acrobatics. Also, if somebody attempts to initiate a grapple or something, having that acrobatics as opposed to using athletics is going to be very helpful to us. We're also going to get tool proficiency in disguise kit. So if we want to make ourselves appear like a drow elf, for example, that could be very helpful. And thieves' tools, of course, is always useful. So this background is actually going to work out nicely for us. And then we're going to get our starting equipment. Now normally I just choose standard starting equipment. The thing about Ranger with standard starting equipment is it kind of forces you into the longbow. This isn't a longbow character. This is a hand crossbow character. So what I would recommend is, if it's allowed, use your random starting gold. If it's not, you're going to have to start with a longbow and switch it off to a hand crossbow whenever you can. But if we are rolling for gold, then we can expect to get, on average, between 120 and 130 gold pieces. Now, very specific what we need for this character. Number 1, we're going to have an Explorer's Pack. That's going to cost us 10 gold pieces. We're really going to want a hand crossbow. That's going to cost us 75 gold pieces. That's going to be our primary cost at first level. And of course, that's not useful to us unless we have crossbow bolts. That's going to be another gold piece. And then we're going to want some kind of armor. Studded leather, if we can afford it, would be 45 gold pieces. That would give us a total cost at first level of 131 gold pieces. So we would need to roll a little bit above average to be able to afford the studded leather. If we can't afford it, then leather is fine, and that'll only be 10 gold pieces, and our total starting equipment would cost 96 gold pieces, which we're very likely going to be able to take care of. Now, beyond our skills and beyond our favorite enemy and natural terrain, at first level in combat, we don't have a lot extra. The main thing we have is Crossbow Expert. That's going to give us the ability to use our bonus action to fire again with our hand crossbow. And what that means is our average damage at first level will be 8.15 points of damage per round. At first level, that's well above the baseline, so we're doing okay for damage right at first level. And that's the main reason why I like to go Crossbow Expert at first level and grab Sharpshooter later. First level, we have decent hit points at 12. Armor class is going to be 15. That's not a fantastic armor class. It's not terrible, but because we're playing a ranged character, hopefully we're not going to be attacked nearly as often. First level rangers aren't that exciting, but we're going to be reasonably effective in combat, and we're going to be reasonably effective with our skills. No spells yet. Things start to come together for rangers at second level. Because with second level of ranger, we're now going to get our fighting style. That's going to give us the archery option. That gives us a +2 to attack rolls with ranged weapons. That is a huge bonus, and it is probably the most effective fighting style there is. Not flexible like some of the others, but definitely we would expect archery to increase our damage significantly. In fact, our average damage will go up by an average of about 1.3 before we add anything else like Hunter's Mark, for example. Now we're going to get 2 known spells at first level. I recommend grabbing Goodberry. That's going to give us 10 good berries per day. If there are issues with foraging, Goodberry takes care of that because it is treated like a full day's nourishment. Also, there's of course the healing aspect. You can heal up to 10 hit points with good berries, and you can distribute them however you like. I generally figure that if you are going to take a long rest and you have any spell slots left, that's when you cast Goodberry, and you can then have those good berries. They last for 24 hours, which means probably until you take your next long rest. If you don't have any spell slots when you go to bed, then it's often a good idea to cast a Goodberry when you get up, because again, those good berries, you want to have them available when you need them. The other spell we're going to grab at first level is Hunter's Mark. This is a bonus action spell, so the first thing we need to keep in mind is that when we place a Hunter's Mark, we cannot take our bonus action attack on that turn. So when we want to use Hunter's Mark is against a big enemy. If we're fighting a bunch of kobolds, we don't want to be using Hunter's Mark because we just can't place it fast enough to have it do more damage than we can just do with our hand crossbow. But if we are facing a big enemy, suddenly there's an Umber Hulk, well, then we're going to want to place our Hunter's Mark on round 1. And then on round 2 and following rounds, we're going to be getting those 2 attacks with a d6 on each of them. So we're going to actually be doing more damage with Hunter's Mark than somebody using a longbow, for example. And what that means for our damage is, if we are not using a Hunter's Mark, we could expect to be doing 9.45 damage per round, still well above the baseline. But after a first round, if we can place a Hunter's Mark and be getting that bonus action attack on top of Hunter's Mark, we could expect 14.7 points of damage per round. That's a ton of damage for the level. So second level is a big deal for the Ranger because we are improving our offense with the archery combat style. We are improving our offense with the Hunter's Mark, and we are improving our utility by having Goodberry. But for this character, the really big level is level 3, and that is the level where we can now select our archetype for Ranger. And it should be relatively obvious. The subtype you definitely want to take with a Ranger in an Underdark campaign, and maybe in any campaign, is the Gloom Stalker. Gloom Stalker, in my opinion, is by far the best subclass for Ranger. Number 1, we're going to get some additional known spells with Gloom Stalker. This is true of all the subclasses of Ranger in Xanathars. All the Xanathar Rangers get bonus spells. The Player's Handbook Rangers do not. So, from a spellcasting point of view, the Xanathar's Rangers are superior. What we are going to be getting with this character at 3rd level is a Disguise Self spell. Again, something that could be useful to us if we want to appear like a drow. It would give us some additional options too. It would probably be hard to use a disguise kit to appear like a Grey Dwarf, for example, but a Disguise Self spell could do that for us. Eventually we are going to get Rope Trick as well. Rope Trick is a very nice spell for a Ranger to have. It is generally your short rest spell. You cast it and you're going to have an hour of safety and an hour where you are hidden, where characters can take a short rest and recover their pack slots or their action surges, that kind of thing. So Gloom Stalker magic, not the strongest kind of extra spells for a ranger, but they're still decent spells to have. At 3rd level, we're also going to get Dark Vision to a range of 60 feet. As a human, of course, we didn't have Dark Vision. We're in the Underdark. Of course, we're going to want Dark Vision. Ideally, we're going to have a party where everyone has Dark Vision. We're going to talk about that a little bit soon because we need to talk about the tactics. But Dark Vision, range of 60 feet, going to be super useful for us. But the big thing, the main reason why Gloomstalker is so amazing at something like the Underdark is we are also adept at evading creatures that rely on dark vision. While in darkness, you are invisible to any creature that relies on dark vision to see you in that darkness. Now, I will tell you that if you are playing an Underdark campaign, you should expect to be in darkness almost all the time, unless you're using your own light source. And creatures you face in the Underdark will rely on one of two methods of seeing you. The first one is dark vision, the second one is blind sight. Gloomstalkers have no special ability against blind sight, but dark vision, especially if we're talking about things like drow or grey dwarves, is what they're going to be using to see. And when they look at you, they're not going to see you. So that means you basically have improved invisibility, except it's not using a spell slot. You don't need to cast it, and it doesn't require your concentration. So if you are in the Underdark and you face a group of drow, they will not be able to see you. That means if you successfully use stealth, they may not know you're there at all. But even if you don't use stealth, they will not be able to target you with anything that requires sight. That includes a lot of different kinds of spells, and any attacks against you are going to have disadvantage on those attacks. Furthermore, any attacks you make will have advantage. And once we get into Sharpshooter, that is going to be massive. But the Gloomstalker just keeps getting stuff at level 3 because they also get Dread Ambusher if Umbral Sight wasn't enough. And what happens? Number 1, initiative rolls. Initiative rolls are always important. We're going to get our Wisdom modifier as a bonus to our initiative rolls, and our Wisdom is good. We have a 16 Wisdom. That's plus 3 to our initiative, so our initiative bonus just doubled. It went from plus 3 to plus 6. Also, at the start of your first turn of combat, we can move an additional 10 feet, which is okay. It can be definitely useful if we need to position ourselves in an area of darkness. And if we take the attack action on that turn, which we likely will, we can make one additional weapon attack as part of that action. Doesn't require a bonus action or anything like that. So if we're, for example, setting up our Hunter's Mark on round 1, we can still get those 2 attacks. And now we have our Hunter's Mark, and we're making 2 attacks around. Also, if that extra attack hits, the target takes an additional d8 damage of the weapon's damage type. So we're not just getting another attack on round 1, we're getting an additional attack on round 1 that also deals extra damage, and this is every single combat. So the offense here just got crazy, especially if we can be in darkness in combat. But we are going to take Ranger for 2 more levels, and the main reason we want to do that is for extra attack. But we're going to get an ability score improvement at 4th level, and this is where we're going to add in Sharpshooter. Now, Sharpshooter does a number of good things for us. We can ignore half and 3/4 cover. We can attack at long range without imposing disadvantage on our ranged weapon attack rolls. This is important for us too, because hand crossbow's range isn't as good as a longbow. Hand crossbow has a short range of 30 feet. That means up to this point, we've needed to stay within 30 feet of our enemies in order to attack them without disadvantage, but it has a long range of 120 feet, and we're pretty much always going to be within 120 feet of our enemies in any normal combat. So from now on, our range just quadrupled. But the most important thing we get is before we make an attack with a ranged weapon that we're proficient in, we can choose to take a -5 penalty to the attack roll, and if the attack hits, we add +10 to the damage roll. If we are in the Underdark, and we are in darkness, and we are fighting something that uses dark vision to see, we will be able to make up to 3 attacks on round 1. I probably wouldn't worry about Hunter's Mark at this point. 2 with our attack action, 1 with our bonus action. All 3 will be made with the +2 to hit from the archery combat style, and all 3 will be made with advantage because we're essentially attacking from invisibility, so all 3 are likely to hit. And that is going to add 10 additional damage to each attack. That's likely going to be 30 points of damage, 20 if we're unlucky. in the very first round of combat as additional damage. If we're fighting things that are using dark vision, and again, if we're in an Underdark campaign, this is going to be all the time. And when we are fighting those creatures, we're always going to have advantage on our attack rolls. That means we're pretty much always going to want to take the -5 to hit for the +10 damage. It's going to increase our damage output by a large degree. It's basically like Great Weapon Mastery on a Barbarian that uses Reckless Attack. It's the same kind of thing, except we don't have any disadvantage to our defense. In fact, our defense is stronger. Now we're going to be grabbing 2 additional spells. And the first level spell I want to grab is Absorb Elements, because this is, number one, when we multiclass into Cleric, it's not something we're going to be able to get, but it is a reaction spell that allows us to get resistance to a type of damage when we're hit with a fireball or a lightning bolt or those kinds of things. And the second level spell I want to grab is Pass Without Trace. It's not enough to just be invisible. If we don't want to be detected at all, we will need Pass Without Trace. This will turn the entire party into stealth experts. It is a 1-hour duration spell that's going to give a +10 bonus to everyone, including us, in our stealth rolls. And we can do every creature within 30 feet. So we could even have a case where, and I've had this happen, where we have a druid in the party, and that druid maybe does summoning spells. So they have a whole bunch of giant spiders. And then what we can do is, with our Pass Without Trace, we can target the entire party and all the summoned creatures. So we might have 10, 15 creatures, and every single one of them is going to be great at stealth. So at 5th level, that's the point where we're going to multiclass and we're going to go into Cleric. And the Cleric subclass that I recommend for this is Forge Domain. At 1st level, we gain the ability to imbue magic into a weapon or armor. At the end of a long rest, you can touch one non-magical object that is a suit of armor or a simple or martial weapon. Until the end of your next long rest or until you die, the object becomes a magic item, granting +1 bonus to AC if it's armor or +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls if it's a weapon. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. So this is basically like a permanent +1 object, and we can change it. So if we want it on our armor, we can have it on our armor. We can have it on somebody else's armor. We could have it on somebody else's weapon. But what we probably want to do is have it on our hand crossbow. Number one, our character is probably as good offensively as anyone in the party. He's probably making as many attack rolls as anybody in the party. And finally, when we're talking about magic items that you tend to find in campaigns, one thing I find you tend not to find are magical hand crossbows. You find magical longbows all the time. Occasionally a magical light crossbow or even a magical heavy crossbow, but I just don't see a lot of +1, +2, or +3 hand crossbows coming up certainly in published campaigns. So having the ability to make our hand crossbow magical all the time is going to be huge, really important for this character, because we're going to be coming up against creatures that are going to be resistant or immune to non-magical attacks, and Blessing of the Forge is the way to get around that without having to use our concentration in a spell slot for something like Magic Weapon or something like that. Blessing of the Forge just basically takes care of it, takes care of the problem that hand crossbows aren't as common as longbows. Now, our domain spells at 1st level are Identify, which I don't find to be a particularly useful spell. Whenever I say that, somebody in the comments is going to tell me about using Identify to identify cursed items. And all I can say is look in your Dungeon Master's Guide under cursed items and you'll see why Identify is no good. And then Searing Smite, which is not a good spell even if you are playing a melee character. So these domain spells I'm just not going to use. That's okay. I can just take spells that I am going to use. Now, an important thing to remember here is we have 5 levels of Ranger already. When we are looking at multiclassing, we're going to add our Cleric levels to half of our Ranger levels rounded down to determine our spell slots. But let's begin with our cantrips. And the cantrips I would probably look at is number 1, I'm definitely going to take Guidance. Talk about Guidance all the time. It's one of the best cantrips in the game. Gives you that D4 on an ability check, and we often know we're going to be making an ability check before we make it. We're going to search the room. Guidance to improve our perception or investigation rolls. We're going to pick a lock. Guidance to improve that Thieves' Tools roll. So Guidance is definitely going to be the first selection. Second selection is Spare the Dying. it's just one of those things. We're not really a primary healer, but if somebody goes down and we just want them to stabilize, Spare the Dying is a good way to do that. And then the final one I would probably consider is Thaumaturgy. Now, Thaumaturgy is a reasonably versatile spell, not a particularly powerful spell. We can make our voice boom, we can make flames flicker, brighten, dim, or change color for a minute. We can cause harmless tremors in the ground for a minute. We can create instantaneous sound that originates from a point of our choice within range. We can instantaneously cause an unlocked door or window to fly open or slam shut. And we can alter the appearance of our eyes for 1 minute. So why Thaumaturgy I think is good for this character is, remember again, creatures that are relying on dark vision to see cannot see us. So Thaumaturgy could be a reasonably effective way of creating distractions. You need to sneak past those guards. Well, maybe that door over there just opened up, or maybe they hear sounds from down the hallway. If we need to get past an area that might be lit by a fire, we might be able to dim that light to the point where we have darkness that we can get through. Then we're going to get 4 first level spells. I think the first one is definitely Bless. Now, if I can set up Bless before combat, it's going to be just straight out better for me than Hunter's Mark, because so much of our damage relies on hitting with that sharpshooter. And that additional D4 is going to turn a lot of misses into hits. And especially if for some reason we don't have the ability to attack with advantage, maybe we're taking on something with blind sight, maybe we happen to be in a lit area. With a Bless, in addition to our archery, is basically nullifying that -5. And finally with Bless, we're targeting 2 other creatures, so other creatures are getting the benefit in addition to us. I also like Healing Word here, just a simple bonus action, bring somebody up when they go down spell. And then I'd probably look at a couple rituals. Detect Magic is pretty obvious first choice. The second choice I might consider is Detect Poison and Disease. Again, in the Underdark, things like poison and disease can be relatively common. So that first level of Cleric helps us out quite a bit. We get a lot of additional spells available for us to cast. We get the ability to use ritual magic. Now I should point out, when you get to first level of Cleric, you need to get a holy symbol. Whether it's an amulet or an emblem on your armor, you need to get that holy symbol because clerics use spell focuses, rangers don't. So when we get Cleric, we need that holy symbol. But the big thing is that ability to make that hand crossbow into a magic weapon, basically permanently. That is going to be a big deal for this character because by 6th level, we are getting into those levels where we need a magic weapon. Now, if you're lucky and you happen to be in a campaign where you got a magical hand crossbow, and probably not luck, it's probably a nice DM. Okay, so you have a nice DM, and they said, you know what, we're going to change this magic longbow to a magic hand crossbow. So you have a magic hand crossbow, then we can use our Forged Main ability for somebody else, either giving them a magic weapon if they don't have one, or boosting a frontliner's armor class. So I'm going to jump up a couple levels at a time. So we're going to go to 3rd level. Now remember, this character is going to be able to cast 2nd level spells, but they will be able to use 3rd level spell slots. Now normally, when I am looking at a cleric going into 3rd level, spiritual weapon is just the most obvious choice in the world. For this character, I'm not going to take spiritual weapon, and the reason is because spiritual weapon uses our bonus action. We already have an attack with our bonus action. We don't need to cast spiritual weapon to get it. And frankly, our bonus action attack with a hand crossbow is going to do significantly more damage than a spiritual weapon because we have bigger bonus to hit and we have the ability to use sharpshooter to get that +10 damage. But what I would absolutely grab with our 2nd level spells first and foremost is Aid, because Aid is a spell that is going to give a big bonus to multiple members of our party, and it scales really well. So this is something I could use my 3rd level slot for, and it would be an effective use of my 3rd level slot because I can choose 3 creatures. They're each going to have their maximum hit points increased by 15 points. Now at 8th level, 15 points, that's almost 2 hit points per level for 3 different party members. And this lasts for 8 hours, no concentration. The other spell I would grab is Silence. Silence could be really effective, especially assume we're going up against Drow. One thing we can count on with Drow, they're going to be spellcasters. They're probably all spellcasters for things like Fairy Fire, which we definitely don't want to get hit with. But in addition, there are a lot of drow subtypes that are going to be high-level spellcasters. One way or the other, we're looking at a lot of verbal components. If we can get up to them with a silence spell, we're going to largely prevent those spells from being used. And our spell slots are quite good at this level. We're going to have 4 first level spells, 3 second level spells, and 2 third level spells. So we're going to take Cleric up to level 5. First thing that's going to happen is we're going to get an ability score improvement. Now you probably noticed that we're starting to get a lot of concentration effects. In fact, right from second level we've been concentrating reasonably often. Now, to a large degree, we're kind of counting on the fact that we're not going to be a target of enemy attacks all that often. A lot of enemies can't even see us, so they're going to have disadvantage on attack rolls. But concentration is still going to be up a lot of the time, and we want to get up our concentration. In addition, we have an odd constitution score. In addition, a lot of constitution saving throws aren't about concentration, and they happen a lot. So resilient constitution is going to be our choice here. This is going to beef up our hit points, it's going to beef up our concentration, and it's going to beef up our constitution saves for all other kinds of things. Things like poison come up all the time in the Underdark. Things like disease come up all the time in the Underdark. Constitution saves, they happen a fair amount. We're going to get an additional cantrip and picking up the mending spell at this point. Again, if we are in an extended Underdark campaign, we may not have access to markets to replace items that get damaged, so a mending spell can be quite useful. I should also mention that as a cleric, I'm going to at least grab Continual Flame for a little bit if I have a party member that doesn't have dark vision. And the reason I would do that is if we have a PC in the party without dark vision, they're going to need a source of light. If they're using a lantern for a source of light, that's going to give them a big radius effect of light. And we actually don't want that because that makes it harder for us to be in darkness. So giving them something like a continual flame in a lantern could be a lot more useful for us because it has a much smaller radius, thus allowing us to stay in darkness without being too far away from the rest of the party. So for third level spells, we're going to get 2 choices here. The first one I would definitely take is Spirit Guardians, and I've talked about Spirit Guardians a lot in my Cleric series, so I'm not going to talk about it a whole bunch more. But what I will say is when we have the crossbow expert feat, we can get in close. So don't worry too much about the fact that we're using a ranged weapon. With Spirit Guardians, we're just fine. Cast your Spirit Guardians, get in there. You don't have to get into melee. You can be 10, you can be 15 feet away. Position yourself somewhere where you can get as many of the enemies as possible. And then you don't have to worry about if somebody is in melee range, it's not going to cause you disadvantage on attacks. Your attacks are going to be just as effective as they always were. And we've just boosted our concentration. That's really going to help because if we are getting in close, we may be subject to more attacks. If we're subject to more attacks, our concentration is going to be tested more often, and that resilient constitution is going to help us keep our Spirit Guardians up. This is going to increase our offense, again, by a lot, because we're doing our Spirit Guardians damage, we're also attacking twice a round with our attack action, and we're getting a bonus action attack every round. Now, I will say, tactically, we're better off using Spirit Guardians in the case where the enemies can't see us. If they can see us, and we're getting in that close, we could be subject to a lot of attacks. And it doesn't matter that we've boosted our concentration, we're going to roll bad eventually, if we don't run out of hit points first. So this is much better when we have that basic improved invisibility effect, because enemies that try to target us to get rid of that Spirit Guardians are going to have a hard time hitting us. The other spell I really like here is Dispel Magic. Again, if something like a fairy fire or something hits us, we're going to want to get that down. In addition, when we're taking on stronger spellcasters, and in the Underdark we certainly take them on, they're going to have effects. Maybe they have their own Spirit Guardians that we want to take down, or any other of any number of effects. Dispel Magic is going to be really useful for us. And remember, we can upcast Dispel Magic as a 4th level slot, no problem. In addition, we can upcast our Spirit Guardians with a 4th level slot, no problem. And we know Spirit Guardians is one of the best spells to scale in the game. The final thing I want to do is I want to get rid of Detect Poison and Disease, and I want to go back to 3rd level and also prepare the Revivify spell. Hopefully not a spell we're going to need very much, but when you need it, you definitely want to have it prepared because, of course, Revivify doesn't work on a body that died on the previous day, so it's not like we can add it after a long rest and then use it. So you need to have it prepared. So what's happened is at 10th level, we actually have a massive number of ways of doing damage. On the first round of combat, we're attacking 3 times just with our attack action alone. We could attack 4 times if we want to use our bonus action to improve that attack as well. If we have Spirit Guardians up, we're also doing damage from that. So now that we've got Cleric level 5 and Ranger level 5, we're actually going to go a little bit off course here. We're going to go back to Ranger for 2 levels, and we're going to take Ranger to level 7. And that's because, again, Gloom Stalker is one of the few subclasses of Ranger that kind of pays you off for going past level 5. Now, it was worth going into Cleric, get things like Spirit Guardians going as soon as we can. But the main thing we want is at level 7, we're going to get Iron Mind. That is going to give us proficiency in Wisdom saving throws. So this character now has proficiency in Dexterity saving throws, in Constitution saving throws, and in Wisdom saving throws. Having those 3, that's like the perfect trifecta. We now have saving throws with good bonuses for all the saving throws we're likely to make in a campaign. Are we going to be making Charisma saving throws in a campaign? Potentially, but we're not going to be making many. But Wisdom, Dexterity, Constitution, we're going to make lots of those. And remember, our base Dexterity, Wisdom, and Constitution are all 16. So we already have a +3 bonus before we're adding a proficiency bonus. So we can have great saves with this character. It is worth that additional 2 levels of Ranger just for that. But we're also going to pick another Natural Explorer terrain. We're also going to pick additional Favored Enemy. With Favored Enemy, I think I might go with something like Aberrations, just because things like Mind Flayers or Aberrations could come up. I might consider Monstrosities as well. Aberrations, Monstrosities, both fairly common in the Underdark. We're going to choose an additional language. That language is related to our Favored Enemy. So what we want to pick here is the Deep Speech, which is a language that is used by Aberrations in the Underdark. Our second environment is really going to depend on your campaign. If you're in the Underdark all the time, it doesn't really matter. But assuming you're coming out of the Underdark once in a while, it really just depends what kind of terrain you're likely to be near. Let's go ahead and take Coast. And we're going to get 1 additional spell. Let's grab Animal Messenger. It's basically kind of a utility spell, and it could be occasionally useful for us. So now that we've got 7 levels of Ranger, we're going to go back into Cleric. And we're just going to stay Cleric for the rest of the campaign. Now, if we're doing Out of the Abyss, we're probably talking about a campaign that's going to end, well, we might be 15th level when we finish that campaign. Certainly, most campaigns aren't going to take us to 20th level. What I want to do is take a look at what this character will look like when we get to 15th level. So we're going to take Cleric up to level 8. So that's a 3-level jump, and that's going to give us kind of our final view of what this character is going to look like at that level. So the first thing we're going to get is Soul of the Forge. That's going to give us resistance to fire damage. Second thing we're going to get is Divine Strike. On one of our hits per round, we're going to be able to add 1d8 fire damage, and we're going to get an ability score improvement. And the ability score improvement here I would take as a feat, and I would take Medium Armor Master. This is just perfect for this character. Basically what it means is we are going to be able to switch from our studded leather armor or our breastplate to half plate, and we are going to get our full dexterity bonus with our half plate because we have a +3 dexterity bonus. And finally, we won't be taking disadvantage on stealth checks when we're wearing that half plate, so it is going to probably give us a +2 bonus to our armor class. And when we are often in melee range, when we are using Spirit Guardians and we're in close, having that additional armor class is going to be a big deal, especially if we're being attacked with disadvantage. Attacking somebody with disadvantage with a moderate armor class is difficult, but attacking somebody with a good armor class with disadvantage is almost impossible. In terms of spells, I think Banishment's a really good option here. Remember, we have 7 levels of Ranger on top of our 8 levels of Cleric, so that means that we are casting spells as if we were an 11th level caster. That means we have 6 level spell slots. Banishment is a spell that scales really well, because we can target an additional creature each time we level it. So if we use a 6th level slot for Banishment, we can target 3 creatures with it. That's really good. We're going to get Wall of Fire, and we're going to get Fabricate for domain spells. These are okay spells, not ones I'm going to be using all the time. One I definitely probably also want to take is Freedom of Movement, because when you need it, you really need it. And when you are in the Underdark, things like webs come up a lot. So with this character, we have a reasonable amount of spells, a reasonable amount of spell slots. This is still not something I consider to be a primary caster. This is mainly an offensive powerhouse. By giving us extra attack at level 5, plus the ability to get that additional attack on the first round of combat, so 3 attacks on round 1. And then Crossbow Expert is giving us another attack, so 4 attacks on round 1, 3 attacks every round after that. But that's not all. Because we are a cleric, because we have Spirit Guardians, we're going to be doing Spirit Guardians on top of that. So, while a straight fighter at 15th level could expect to be attacking 3 times every round, 4 times every round if they have something like Crossbow Expert, which they likely do, we're attacking 3 times a round, but instead of that 1 additional attack, we're going to have a Spirit Guardians cast with a high level spell slot. So it's going to be attacking multiple creatures every round, creating difficult terrain around us. And so we can expect to be doing as much or more damage than that straight fighter. But in addition, unlike that fighter, we're going to have more skills. We're going to have our abilities through Natural Explorer, going to be a big deal. We're going to have a number of spells that are going to give us utility, going to give us healing, going to take down spellcasters, going to banish enemies. So there's a lot of different options here that, say, a fighter doesn't have, but we're not giving up any of the offense to do it. And finally, defensively, this is a very strong character. We are going to have a base armor class of 19, likely with half plate. That's with no magical items whatsoever. We are going to have saving throw bonuses on dexterity, constitution, and wisdom of +8 each. That is fantastic to have. If we have a paladin in the party, we may never miss a saving throw. Now again, this particular character is really suited for a specific kind of campaign. Would I play this kind of character in a campaign that's not based in the Underdark? I mean, it would be okay, but I don't think it's our best bet anymore. But in an Underdark heavy campaign, this is going to be a powerhouse character. And we're going to really boost the entire party. Because things like the aid spell to increase everybody's hit points, things like the bless spell to increase people's attacks and their saving throws, things like pass without trace that is going to give the entire party the ability to stealth well. So we are good at boosting the entire party, not just being effective ourselves. So that's the Subterranean Slayer. That's the first of my cleric builds, or builds that involve cleric. This one was kind of half ranger, half cleric. The next build I want to do, and I'm going to do it next week, is a light cleric build. And that one is going to be a blasting build. So I hope you'll join me for that next week. Until then, I'm going to sit back. I'm going to relax and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, Optimancers. See you next week.